Just imagine a typical Italian city filled with local Italian residents speaking the regional languages of Italy, who attend traditional Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman churches, who celebrate the Catholic Mass, not the Orthodox one, and whose church architecture is also unmistakably Italian. But imagine that this city is not located in Italy. In fact, it's not even close to Italy. It is beyond the Mediterranean Sea, on the Black Sea in Crimea. That's what we're going to talk about today, and we'll discover more about the Italian colonies of Crimea. Who are these Italians? How did they end up there, after all? And what is their current situation? So to find out all about this, go ahead and leave your like and subscribe to the channel, and watch the video until the end. The description of this mysterious Italian city, located so far from Italy in Crimea, is real. And not just this city, but other human settlements were also developed by Italians in Crimea. But why did Italians travel such a long way to live in Crimea? And the answer is the Silk Road. The Silk Road, in case you didn't know, was a very important trade route that connected the east of the world to the west, to Europe. So a wide variety of valuable products like intricate handicrafts, colorful fabrics, exotic spices, and even many different groups of people who left the east heading toward the distant lands of Europe used the ancient and legendary network known as the Silk Road for their long journeys. Consequently, exotic goods arriving from distant lands like Persia, ancient China, and India, as well as various other regions, consistently supplied a highly demanding European consumer market, which was more than willing to pay a premium price for these luxury products sourced from far outside the borders of Europe. Now, the essential key to truly understanding exactly why the Italians were specifically located in Crimea is the strategic Black Sea region, because back in the 11th century, the Black Sea played a vital role that was very similar to how today's major international commercial hub airports function for global trade. Although it certainly wasn't the final destination for these valuable trade goods and exotic commodities, it served as an absolutely essential stop on the long journey toward their ultimate destination, which, in this specific case, was the lucrative and high-end luxury consumer markets found throughout Western Europe. So, in order to make a significant amount of money, the Italians, specifically those merchants hailing from the most serene Republic of Genoa and the most serene Republic of Venice, willingly undertook immense personal risks and moved to live in the distant lands of Crimea. Because by controlling Crimea, located in the heart of the Black Sea, they were able to control the Silk Road trade that passed through the Black Sea and thus build fortunes, which is exactly what happened. And it was by doing this that the Italian colonies developed in Crimea. In what specific way did the Genoese, who were the very first Italians to settle in Crimea, successfully go about establishing their presence there? And the answer? Diplomacy. The strategic use of diplomacy was the primary way the Republic of Genoa found to successfully negotiate with the Mongol Empire. Consequently, in the year 1266, the Mongol Tatars, who held dominion over the vast region of Crimea, granted the Republic of Genoa the official right to establish a trading colony. This strategic colony was originally called Kaffa, and today the historic city, which is no longer known by the name Kaffa, is now formally named Feodosia. It officially became Genoese territory, and interestingly, it was not through military conquest. Instead, it happened through diplomatic negotiation because the Genoese were extremely pragmatic and clearly understood that they didn't need to conquer the entire world. To significantly expand their business and global interests, they realized they simply needed to conduct trade with those who ruled the world. However, a port in Crimea, specifically in the historic city of Kaffa, was far more than just a simple maritime port. It was truly a vibrant city, and a city that possessed a very distinct and unique cultural identity. Just take a moment to think about that. A Genoa on the shores of the Black Sea. What does it mean to build a city from scratch, thousands of kilometers from home, surrounded by peoples, languages, and ethnicities completely different from your own, from Italy? Well, that is exactly what the people of Genoa did, and they did it well. The city of Kaffa grew at an impressive speed. In the 14th century, it had more than 100,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities in the known world at that time, larger than many European capitals. The detailed description provided at the very beginning of this video is of this historic city. There were, in fact, massive walls with stone towers, Catholic churches holding traditional Roman Mass, and an intricate and complex system, a conglomerate of justice, bureaucracy, and tax structures from the Republic of Genoa. There were even bustling exchange houses and warehouses filled to the brim with precious silk, black pepper, and exotic spices. And of course, numerous majestic ships bearing the iconic cross of St. George, the proud symbol of the Republic of Genoa, were docked along the city's coast. But despite the firm Genoese control and the strategic diplomatic conquest of the entire city by the Genoese, Kaffa was not just Genoese, in fact, it was a melting pot. Tatars, Armenians, Greeks, Jews, and various other Italian groups, such as the Venetians, lived there. And all these diverse groups often harbored deep-seated animosity toward one another. The Venetians and the Genoese, in fact, were fierce and direct competitors in the commercial world. And street-level conflicts among all the various ethnicities living in Crimea were quite frequent. Interestingly, the common lingua franca used in this remarkably diverse and cosmopolitan city was a complex linguistic blend of Italian, Turkish, and Greek. And to this very day, no professional linguist has ever quite managed to catalog exactly what unique and mysterious language it was. So eclectic, with different origins, reflecting the very demographic makeup of the city. It was an extremely fascinating city. According to some observers, it was essentially another Genoa. But there was one specific thing that made it distinctly different from Genoa. It was not in the heart of Europe, but at the very far edge of the continent. But even at the very edge of the known world, perilous danger still exists, and Kaffa is about to face the most terrifying threat of them all. It is a deadly plague that arrives, launched over the walls by enemy catapults. The year is 1346. The Tatar Khan, Janibeg, besieges Kaffa with a military army. The siege lasts for months. But then, something unexpected and terrifying begins to happen. The soldiers who were besieging the Genoese city began to die in large numbers, but not from military battle deaths, rather from a mysterious, deadly disease that caused black spots, high fever, and a swift death. Often they would perish within just 3 days. It is the Black Death. It is arriving from Central Asia through the Mongol armies, which infected the soldiers who were besieging the city of Kaffa. The leader, Janibeg, becomes desperate and possibly furious, makes a decision that will change the course of all European history. He then gives the command that the bodies of his fallen soldiers, who were killed by the deadly plague, be catapulted over the high walls of Kaffa and into the city. Inside the besieged city with the infected bodies, the Genoese panic. The disease spreads, deaths occur, and those who can flee by ship back to the Mediterranean Sea. And it is on these merchant vessels, guided by the Genoese sailors fleeing the besieged city of Kaffa in Crimea, that the Black Death finally arrives in Europe. Kaffa was, in all probability, the primary starting point of the most devastating pandemic in the recorded history of mankind. The ancient Italian city located in Crimea, where early Europeans once said was the very end of the known world, the European merchants exported death to the entire rest of the European world. But even after the deadly plague had passed, Kaffa was still far too wealthy to be abandoned, and the Italian settlers, primarily the Genoese, but also the Venetians, chose to remain established there. In 1453, Constantinople falls. The Ottoman Empire now controls access to the Black Sea through the Bosphorus. The Italian cities in Crimea, including Kaffa, the main and most important one, are now isolated. For 2 long decades, the Genoese tried to negotiate, pay financial tributes, and maintain their privileges, but unfortunately they were not successful in their endeavors. In 1475, Sultan Mehmed II, the same one who conquered Constantinople, sent a fleet to Crimea. Kaffa falls in 3 days. There was no epic battle, there was no resistance, no heroics. The city simply surrendered, outnumbered and overpowered militarily. The Genoese were in no position to resist. Those who couldn't escape from Crimea were enslaved or deported to Constantinople. Does the long history of 200 years of Italian presence in Crimea finally come to an end? No, because not all the Italians chose to leave. Many stayed behind, converted to Islam, married local Tatars, changed their surnames to match their surroundings, and ultimately integrated themselves into the fabric of the other peoples who now dominated the peninsula. And as for their descendants, they remain in Crimea to this very day. From the end of the historical rule of the most serene Republic of Genoa, and also of Venice, in the Crimean Peninsula, we jump centuries ahead. We find a community that almost no one expected to still exist. In the 19th century, the Russians dominate Crimea. It was conquered and annexed by Catherine the Great in the year 1783, and the Tsarist officials then conducted a comprehensive demographic census of the entire population of the Crimean Peninsula. What they found truly surprised them. In some isolated coastal villages, especially in the southern region of the peninsula, there existed a historic community. These were descendants of Italians, that is to say, of medieval settlers, primarily of Genoese origin, who never left the peninsula, even after the Ottoman Empire had taken full control of the region. They speak their own unique local dialect, which intricately mixes Venetian with Greek, Tatar, and Russian elements. Consequently, the ancestral blood of Italians, Genoese, and Venetians from the Middle Ages was still very much present there. Only now it has become thoroughly mixed with the blood, language, and cultural customs of various other peoples as well. They had preserved, through centuries of isolation, rare fragments of an Italy that even Italy itself had long since forgotten. This was discovered because a group of Russian linguists in the 19th century realized something startling. It is said that there were many such secrets. Words derived, for example, from the ancient Venetian language, the unique language still spoken today in the Italian region of Veneto, which had largely fallen out of common use in Italy itself, but in the region of Crimea were remarkably preserved, even though they were carefully maintained within this complex mixture with the diverse languages of other peoples with whom they lived. These descendants of Italians gradually intermingled and integrated over the many centuries. Under the period of Russian rule, many new Italian settlers arrived on the peninsula. Following the conclusion of the Congress of Vienna, which took place in 1815, Tsar Alexander I of Russia actively sought to develop these newly acquired territories in the south for his expanding empire. This was seen most notably in the region of Crimea. To achieve this goal, the Russian imperial government sent official representatives to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which ruled over the territories of southern Italy at that time. Their primary aim was the recruitment of highly skilled settlers from across Italy to bring them to the shores of the Black Sea and also the Sea of Azov, thus initiating a significant new phase of Italian colonization. This took place on the historic peninsula, where centuries earlier many Italians had first set sail for distant lands. But this time, it involved Italian settlers, not from Genoa or Venice, but rather from southern Italy. Russia specifically needed specialized labor to build essential infrastructure and develop trade in strategic port cities such as Kerch, Odessa, and Sevastopol. For this specific purpose, these Italians proved to be very convenient, both for Russian interests and for their own. Because at this very moment, a truly devastating economic crisis and widespread misery were unfolding across the entire nation of Italy. Extreme poverty had taken a firm hold over the southernmost regions of the Italian peninsula due to archaic social structures and also a lack of land for peasants in the 19th century. During this period, there was immense demographic pressure, driven by rapid population growth and a severe shortage of jobs to employ this surplus population. In Italy, mass emigration became the only viable option for many families desperately trying to avoid starvation. In addition, a complex series of social and economic factors further complicated the situation for the working class. A small minority of the Italian immigrants who went to Crimea were anti-Bourbon political activists fleeing harsh repression in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies while living in Crimea. It is worth noting that, unlike the massive waves of immigration that occurred across the Americas during the 19th and 20th centuries, the specific wave of Italian immigrants heading to Crimea in the 19th century attracted specialized groups with very specific skills, such as maritime navigation and fishing. This was largely because many experienced sailors from the Apulia region brought advanced fishing and navigation techniques to the ports of Crimea. Furthermore, there was also expertise in architecture and the fine arts, as qualified professionals like architects, doctors, engineers, and Italian artists were fundamental in the construction and beautification of southern Russian cities, such as the port of Odessa, for example. These individuals also made lasting impacts in the fields of agriculture and wine production. Many Italians also introduced new crop varieties and innovative farming techniques that adapted remarkably well to the climate of the Crimean Peninsula. This vibrant community actually flourished greatly for many years, to the point of establishing its own Italian schools and its own Italian libraries in the city of Kerch, which continued up until the very beginning of the 20th century, just before facing the dark and difficult periods that we will see next during the rise of the Soviet regime. In 1941, the Second World War reached Crimea. The Germans occupy the peninsula, and the Italian community of Crimea, like all the other minority groups living in the region, is caught in the crossfire. When the Soviet forces retake the Crimean Peninsula in 1944, Joseph Stalin decides that he cannot trust the ethnic minorities living there. Following the German occupation of the region, for this reason, Stalin orders the mass deportation of Italians as well as the Greeks and Crimean Tatars who lived there, loading them onto crowded freight trains. Without any form of trial and without the right to a legal defense, entire Italian families were forcibly deported from Crimea to the distant Siberia and Kazakhstan. Tragically, many of these people died during the long journey, while many others perished in harsh labor camps or from diseases during their first difficult years of exile. Those who survived were forbidden to return to Crimea for decades. Their homes were taken, their documents destroyed, their cemeteries were abandoned. In their languages, in just one generation, Stalin almost accomplished what centuries of Ottomans and Russians had not, erasing the Italians of Crimea from the face of that land. But almost does not mean completely finished. And this is precisely the point where the story turns again. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, some families tried to return to Crimea. Not all of them, after all. Many had already spread throughout Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan, and had already completely assimilated into these other regions. But some families did return to Crimea, and with them an attempt at rebuilding their identity. It was during that era, throughout the 1990s and the early 2000s, shortly after the historic fall of the Berlin Wall, that dedicated Italian researchers, primarily from the University of Naples, finally managed to identify and carefully document a unique Creole dialect of many different origins, including various languages from Italy, that was still being spoken by some elderly people living in Crimea. In many local communities across the peninsula, extensive audio recordings of this Creole were made, comprehensive dictionaries were carefully drafted, and a traditional language that was rapidly dying out was, at least partially, preserved and documented for the future. This is a language that has a deep Italian origins, as well as various other roots from the Mediterranean, and which means something very specific in its original context. The extensive historical heritage of Italy throughout the region of Crimea was carefully documented, and furthermore, many other significant signs of an Italian cultural identity were clearly observed on the Crimean Peninsula in recent years. For example, there are families in Crimea even today with Italianized surnames like Spinola, Franco, Cambruzzi, but who do not speak Italian and are not Roman Catholic. And perhaps they don't even know exactly where these surnames came from. But it is the trace of 700 years of history compressed into a single family name and still preserved in this corner of Europe, which is Crimea. In other words, identity can survive, even if only in fragments, through a Creole language or through family surnames. Even when religion changes, even when history tries to erase it, history still hides in surnames, in recipes, in the stories grandparents tell, and above all, in the blood they pass on. So, let us now return to the detailed description of a typical Italian city, which was historically located in the region of medieval Crimea. We can certainly conclude that it really did exist in the form of several different Italian colonies across Crimea, with the most prominent and main one of these cities being Kaffa, which is known today as the city of Feodosia. Even today, the ancient stone walls of Feodosia still clearly show the distinct Italian origins and architectural heritage of the city. The towers are still standing, and if you know what to look for, you will find engraved on the stones the marks of the cross of St. George, which symbolizes the most serene Republic of Genoa, a 700-year-old signature that shows the history of the Italians in Crimea is not a story of victory, but at the same time, it is a story of preservation. It is a story, therefore, that even if it is not one of a typical victory, at least it is still a victory. This is an existential territory, which in itself represents a profound act of resistance and bravery by a people. It was the resilient Italian people who helped to shape this land, which is one of the most interesting regions. If this video made you think about how history is truly made up of layers, invisible peoples, and ancient languages, please share it, because the best way to keep a story alive is to continue to tell it. And the best way to keep this channel alive is to spread the word about it. Leave your like in this video, subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.